All right, welcome to SuperLab Emi401. All right, what we're going to be focusing on today is selecting a single hypothesis, prediction, or conclusion that is supported by a model. All right, let's everybody take a look at the background information at the top of the skill sheet, which is always the best way to start with a skill sheet. And let's get started with, yeah, can you please read the background information for us?
Science passages in the ACT often present you with an experiment and with data, but do not discuss the results. The test writers leave the analysis and conclusion part of the scientific method up to you. EMI401 questions will ask you to draw conclusions or predictions based on the data from the experiment. These are usually the last questions in an individual passage, which means that you have already had the chance to analyze information in previous questions.
All right, a couple important things here. First off, the general format of the ACT is they give you data but no conclusions. All right, so it's your job to make the conclusions, and that's what the EMI401 skill. It's also EMI501, EMI601, and EMI701, all very similar in this regard. Second, that these are almost always the last questions that you'll come up into a passage. So by the time you get to these questions, you've already been asked like 3 or 4 questions about just regular data analysis from the passage of the experiment. Okay, any questions about just what EMI401 is testing or looking for? All right, well, let's jump into the example passage. All right, the example passage, as listed on here, this is very important. This is a conflicting viewpoint passage. It's the first one that we are doing that's conflicting viewpoint for a super lab. All right, conflicting viewpoint passages, the first few sentences before the scientists start arguing are incredibly important because they will outline in general what the passage they're going to be arguing about. All right, so in this case, what are they arguing about? Vlad, you want to read the opening sentence right here for us?
Two scientists are debating whether to classify a newly discovered animal called the flipper flag as a plant of an animal.
Could be or.
Or an animal.
As a plant or an animal. All right, so what they're going to be arguing about here, is this thing a plant or is this thing an animal? When they give you this kind of information, one scientist is going to take one side and one scientist is going to take the other side. One thing you need to know, the scientist never lies. All right, you're going to get presented with a lot of data, and what they're trying to do is just skew the data so that it fits their particular model. They're never going to give you information that's not true. All right, so no scientist will lie to you on these, which is good. All right, so let's get started by reading Scientist 1. What you want to be looking for here is anytime they give a piece of evidence, you want to underline it. All right, anytime they give a specific piece of evidence that proves their point, you want to underline it. So anytime that you see, and it's almost always the first sentence, their hypothesis, you want to circle it. So there's 2 different things that you're actively doing here. We want to, in general, try to avoid highlighters because you're not going to be able to have a highlighter as you're actually reading through the text yourself. All right, so we want to just stick with pens or pencils in this case. All right, so that you can just get in the habit of the underline versus the circle. So you want to circle the hypothesis when you see it pop up, and you want to underline any of their arguments or their pieces of data that you think you have supported. All right, so let's get started off at the beginning. Anybody want to start off and read our first paragraph for us? Thanks, sir.
The liver flag should be categorized into kingdom and safe. The most obvious reason for this classification is that the liver flag can use sunlight to power a photosynthetic process to make its own energy. In addition, further study of liver flag mating habits have shown that the female organism makes food filled with a large seed, similar in appearance to a pear, which are planted into the ground by the male liver flag. These fruits eventually sprout and blossom into liver flag offspring. This method of germination, the process of seed sprouting into a plant, is clearly an indicator that this is a plant.
All right, so let's pause there for a second. First, did anybody circle what they thought was this guy's hypothesis, or this lady's hypothesis? What do you think? Excellent. So scientist 1 is saying that it's a plant. All right, we have 2 scientists arguing whether it's a plant or an animal. This one clearly says it should be a plant. All right, did anybody have an piece of evidence that they picked up? Oh, yeah. The last sentence. This method of germination, good. All right, saying that seeds sprouting from the ground clearly makes it a plant. There's a big piece of evidence right there that they use. Other one? Nice. All All right, does photosynthesis, which is a process that pretty much only plants do. All right. Is there anything else that you could pick up from this that's like, wow, that's a plant thing versus like animals wouldn't normally do this?
Have shown that female organisms make fruit filled with a large seed similar in appearance to a pear.
Nice. So they're making fruits, which only plants that we mostly know of make fruit. All right, and the seed is trapped inside. Good. Nice. These are the three big pieces of evidence that this person is pulling, the scientist is pulling in. They use sunlight, they make fruits filled with seeds, and then the seeds get buried in the ground and then germinate, which is something that plants do. All right, let's take the next paragraph. Anyone volunteer to read the next paragraph for us?
The critical organ has specific structures which extend when embodied with very closely resemble leaves and roots. The leaf structures allow the organism to acquire more cellular tissue that can swim along, while the seed structures are used in water plant. The liver plant has shown that it can use both oxygen and carbon dioxide respiration, which shows a clear preference for utilizing carbon dioxide. A reconsidered study involves the constituted lab has proved zero.
Excellent. All right, any pieces of evidence jump out that you would underline and like, wow, this is what this scientist is trying to say. This is a plant thing, right?
A clear preference for utilizing carbon dioxide.
Excellent. So it's got a clear preference for using carbon dioxide. All right, CO2 is what plants bring in. Thank you. CO2 is what plants use to breathe in order to make their energy. And this one, he's saying it's clearly what plants. All right, there's about two more maybe in here.
Its structures are used for water collection.
Excellent. It has roots. And it's got root structures used for water collection, and yeah, it's got leaves. All right, plants have leaves, and this guy is saying that this thing has leaf structures. Nice. All right, so what we did here is we underlined pretty much 6 pieces of evidence that this scientist is using to support their argument. What we're now going to do is flip to the other arguments so that we can make sure that we understand scientist 2's point of view. Again, we're going to do the same thing. All right, we're going to circle what we think the hypothesis is here, and then underline the supporting pieces of evidence that are going to help us make decisions later. All right, we have a volunteer to read the next paragraph for us. Thank you.
Should be categorized into female and male. Even though the animal can use similar information from energy, it can also gain energy from ingesting other organisms. The liver plant has been observed stalking and hunting from prey, working the same way as a lion. Although liver plants do produce fruits which are buried in the ground and germinate into offspring, the fruits only appear on the organism after a male physically mates with a female. This mating is precluded by an extensive mating band from the male typically avoided from females. This physical mating and mating rituals are very difficult for organisms in human and wildlife.
Excellent. So let's pause there. First off, does anyone want to share with us what they think the hypothesis is here? What would you circle as you went along? Nice. Should be categorized as kingdom animalia as this guy's main point. So far we have scientist 1 saying it's a plant, scientist 2 says it's an animal. Have a piece of evidence for us?
Yes. It says it hunts its prey.
Hunts its prey. Excellent. Nice. All right. Not many plants hunt that I know of. All right. What's another piece of evidence that they use?
The fruits only appear on the organisms after the message is original.
Excellent. So there's some sort of physical mating process that happens here. That's not typical of plants. All right. Most plants just release pollen in the air and then it goes to another flower. There's actually a physical mating process that happens here. It's a very animal type thing. There's one more that happens here.
I think it's ingesting other organisms.
Yeah, actually, that's a good one too. It kind of goes along with hunting, but most plants don't ingest other organisms. Most plants just get their energy from the sun. All right, then there's one left that Mr. Pagan would probably enjoy.
That would be the dancing one, but I thought it was the last one.
Yeah, so we have this physical mating one right here. So you're right, that would definitely be a piece of evidence. And so which other one do you think? Excellent. The mating is precluded by a dance. All right. Hopefully plants don't dance. At least none of the plants in my house dance very much. All right. So there's actually precluded just means comes before. So here's the thing. Scientist 2 is playing a little bit of on the defensive here, trying to say like, well, okay, so there are fruits that get buried in the ground, which is kind of a plant thing, but it only happens after a male physically mates with a female, which is definitely an animal thing. So this is the kind of interesting play that these scientists are going to try to do, is like, one's going to give evidence, and sometimes the other one, their best thing they can do is try to like defend that evidence and say why it's not meaningful. And that idea is going to become really important in this one when they start talking, the second paragraph here, when they start talking about the carbon dioxide.
The type of sunlight as well. It says that they would, animals use sunlight, but it also does maybe.
Yeah, exactly. So he's saying, yeah, you know what? You're right. It does get some energy from the sun, but it hunts its prey, which is an animal. So that's, again, he's kind of like playing on the defensive there, where he's like taking a piece of evidence and making it not go against him. All right, let's take a look at the second paragraph and finish the rest of these.
The structure coming out of the body, which resembles leaves, are not actually leaves, but provide camouflage for fertility plants as seen through the dense forest. In addition, for the root structures are not actually roots, but a long nose cavity, which allows the fruit flies to collect water very into the soil. The fruit flies to use both oxygen and carbon dioxide for respiration. Exercise to use each in specific circumstances. When the organism is stressed, it uses carbon dioxide, and when the organism is calm, it uses oxygen.
Excellent. All right, let's take a look at any evidence in there of why it's a plant. I'm sorry, why it's an animal. We're on scientist 2. Why it's an animal. Excellent. All right, that the structures aren't actually leaves, they're just camouflage that happen to be sticking out. It looks like leaves, which might think, some people think it's a plant, but in the end it's not actually a plant because they're not actually leaves. All right, he does that again with another one of the structures. Which other structure does he use?
The leaf structures are not actually roots, but along those leaves as well as collect water very easily.
Excellent. All right, so he's saying these things aren't roots, they're not plant roots, it's actually just a long nose. That's what sucks the water out of the ground. All right, and then he makes one last point about the whole oxygen carbon dioxide thing. Remember, scientist 1 said this must be a plant because he used carbon dioxide when we had it in the lab.
It says, refers to the specific circumstances, the orgasm itself includes carbon dioxide, orgasm calm and
Excellent. All right, so when it's stressed, it uses CO2, and when it's not stressed, it uses oxygen. All right, so again, he's kind of defending that evidence and trying to play defense.
It's what that has with stress, calm.
Oh. You know, there are some plants that feel stressed, like if you don't water them, and then there's some people who say that you need to talk to plants in order for them to be happier. But for the most part, that's a good piece of evidence to bring up too, that clearly inherent here is some kind of emotion, because we're talking about calm and we're also talking about stress. Oh, actually, we should underline, circle. All right, is that when we talk about things being stressed, all right, we're referring to some sort of emotion that this animal has, and most plants don't have emotion. All right, my tree outside my house has never cried. All right, so what we have now is a good solid chunk of evidence. Everything that you have underlined here is all the evidence that you'll need in order to make the conclusions later on. All right, so the best way to organize it then is to use a Venn diagram, much like this. All right, so in order to organize your thoughts on something like this, clearly you would never have the time to do this on an actual ACT when you read this passage. But it's a great way to organize your thoughts before going in and having to say, take an online test where you only have 3 attempts to get it right. All right, so what we're going to do here is just outline really quick some of their ideas and kind of summarize all the stuff from the reading. All right, first off, can anyone summarize for us what scientist 1's hypothesis was so that we can fill it in the spot?
The The liver flash should be categorized as a plant.
Excellent. So scientist 1 says that it's a plant. All right. Scientist 2
Animal.
says that it should be an animal. All right. Now, what we're going to look at here is sometimes there's things that they agree on, and that's what's going to go in the middle. Sometimes there's going to be things that only scientist 1 thinks, and sometimes there's going to be things that only scientist 2 thinks. All right. So let's get started with one thing that, let's go with one they agree on. What is something that they both agree on? Good. It's alive. Good.
Uses the sunlight for energy.
Excellent. It does use sunlight for energy. Nice. Excellent. It has some kind of fruits that appear. Good. So we have it's alive, it uses sunlight for energy, and that it has fruits. All right. There's also something that is at the very end that we were just covering a second ago about its breathing. What do we know about its breathing?
They both use carbon dioxide and oxygen.
All right. It can use both CO2 and oxygen. Good. All right. What is something that just scientist 1 thinks? So that makes it like just a plant. Has roots. Nice. It has leaves. Nice. Oh, remember we said they actually both think that that one's true for different reasons. Yep.
Germination.
Good. So, do they agree on that or disagree on that?
Oh yeah, they agree.
Yeah. So they actually, this will go in the middle. The germination part will go in the middle. So they both think that it germinates. Good. So do they both think it makes? That was one of our. Except for that's actually something that they both agree on. That they actually both think that fruits can be made here. And so this is the tricky part. Like, what does they actually say that's just plant?
For scientists, one of those that root structures are used for water collection.
Excellent. So we could elaborate here, and we could say that this is for water collection. Good. Is there anything else that's really just the plant guy? That question?
Scientist 2 says that it's like in a desert area, and then scientist 1 doesn't say that.
Actually, where does scientist 1 say it lives?
It actually is scientific assessment.
Yeah, it does. All right. Scientist 1 makes no mention of its ecosystem, whereas scientist 2 says it lives where?
In a desert, where is it? I forgot what it's called.
Yeah, scientist 2 says that it has leaves in order to live in the dense forest.
Oh yeah.
All right, so good. We can put that in the scientist 2 column. Is that scientist 2 says that it lives in the forest. Anything else? We can add scientist 2 to this list now. Anybody else have anything for scientist 2? Well, good. That there's actual physical mating that happens. Nice. Other things? Good. It hunts. Nice. 3. Excellent. It's got a form of camouflage. Nice.
It dances.
It dances. Nice. Excellent. It has a nose. That it's not roots. It's actually a nose. Good. Yes. It has emotion. Nice. Anything else? Good. This is actually a good list because now that we have this, we're going to be able to answer all the other questions. All right. What will these questions look like? The next one gives you an example. Which of the following conclusions would not be drawn by either scientist? So now the things you have to be careful about on these questions. The first thing you have to look for is it something that we're looking for what they would say or what they wouldn't say. And then the second thing you have to look for is which scientist are we talking about? One of them, the other one, both, or neither. All right, so what we're looking at in this case is for something that neither scientist would say. All right, which is the only one of these things that neither scientist would say? A, yeah. All right, the gill thing. Nowhere in there do they talk about gill. So the heavily forested one, B, we just realized they said that. All right, it gets all of its water from either roots or nodes. They would say that. The flipperflap reproduces with fruits. They both agree with that. Which means the only one that's not, that we can make sure that neither of them would say are gills, because none of them talk about gills. And it lives in the forest, one of them says. So why would it ever swimming underwater? All right, and then the explanation. All right, here's what you want to do in your teams. Answer questions 1 and questions 2 together. All right, take about 5 minutes in your team. When you get the answer, raise your hand. All right, so finish up your answers for 1 and 2, and we're going to come back together in about 10 seconds. All right, let's come back together and take a look at these answers. So, as we take a look at question 1, question 1 says, which of the following predictions would most likely be drawn by scientists 2 only? The key thing here is the only part specifically. All right, that means that scientist 2 would say, yes, this is true, and scientist 1 would say, no, this is not true. All right, so in this case, A, something's wrong with A for this question. What's wrong with A?
Both of the scientists say something about burying their offspring.
Excellent. Since both scientists talk about burying their offspring in the soil, 1 and 2 would agree, and so that can't be it. What about 2? What's wrong with 2?
Neither of them mention anything about oceans.
Excellent. Since neither of them mention anything about oceans or land, actually, they specifically mention that they don't leave their eggs in water. They specifically mention that they leave their eggs in the soil. So that one can't be right. All right. Now, what about 3? Do we like 3 or not like 3? Why?
Scientist 2 is the one that said about mating. Before they mate, they have to dance.
Excellent. So scientist 2 said that before they mate, they have to dance. So if you can't dance, you will not reproduce. That is something that scientist 2 would think is true. Good. Nice. Moving on to 2. Which of the following conclusions would be reasonable for scientist 2 to use to discredit scientist 1's discovery about the amount of carbon dioxide and oxygen used by the flipper? So what we're looking at here is, if you remember back from the beginning, scientist 1 said that they prefer using carbon dioxide, and that's a plant thing, so it must be a plant. All right, so somehow scientist 2 has to discredit that to prove that it is an animal. Which of these would you think would scientist 2 use to discredit that piece of information? A, why?
Because it says so flipperflap uses the carbon dioxide as a oxygen is because it was kept in the lab. So because it was kept in the lab, it was stressed. So it's just using carbon dioxide.
Perfect. So the only reason it used more carbon dioxide than oxygen is because it was stressed. If it was normal in the wild, it wouldn't have been stressed, and it would have used oxygen, which is an animal thing, not a plant. Fantastic. All right. You're going to work on the last self-practice questions on your own. Once you are ready to, the way this is going to work is that once you answer them all right, you can raise your hand. I'll come and check them. As soon as you're done and they're the right answers, you can start signing up for computers and jumping on and taking the quiz. We are going to go over these together in about 8 minutes. No, in about 7 minutes. All right, so if you feel like at the end you're still stuck and you don't know why the right answer is what it is or isn't what it is, we're going to go through them together. But if you're ready to go, you can jump on a computer. So raise your hand when you want me to come around and check your answers. So as we start to take a look at the rest of the problems then, let's start on number 3. Which of the following conclusions would be supported by both scientist 1 and scientist 2? So we're looking for something that they would both agree with in this case. A says it should be classified as an animal, B says it should be classified as a plant, C says neither of these would work, and D says both of these should work. What do you think? Why C? Right. So scientist 2 would disagree with A, scientist 1 would disagree with B, so that only leaves left C. All right, number 4. Which scientist would agree with the following conclusion? If the flipperflap was not able to bury its seeds, it would not be able to produce offspring. What do we think there? Who says that that is true? Is that scientist 1, scientist 2, both, or neither?
Both.
Right, it should be both because they both say that it's got to bury its seeds in order to germinate its offspring. Number 5, which conclusion would be supported by scientist 2's model? Right, which one of these is just a scientist 2 thing? Why B? Perfect. So scientist 2 says that the root structure is actually a nose cavity. Noses also smell, which means that scientist 2 would say B. And then last but not least, number 6, it was found that flipperflap cells have cell walls. This trait is not found anywhere in the animal kingdom. Whose hypothesis would be consistent? So who goes along with this? Who would agree with the fact that it has cell walls? A, why?
Because I can go spell because friends.
All right. Since the cell walls aren't found anywhere in the animal kingdom, they're not found anywhere in the animal kingdom, it must be a plant thing, which means it's quiz time. Good luck.